This is Phantom Electric Ghost, and we're live on the air for the first time with Anastasia Lindsey. And welcome to the Phantom Electric Ghost podcast.
Thank you. Hello.
We want to let people know we are a featured podcast on the Newsly platform. So if you use coupon GHOST, you get 1 month free premium subscription so you can stop scrolling and start listening. This podcast is a featured podcast on Newsly, and you'll be able to listen to this episode directly after we finish the live broadcast. Now, one thing we also want to let people know is this is episode 915 of the Family Electric Ghost podcast, which can be heard on Apple Podcast. That's where we're tracking that number. And this episode, we're also going to talk about. This is the topic that we're going to bring up. Let me see. I'm trying to get it to come up. There we go. Healing through poetry power, poetry power and poetry sensitivity. Which I think as a musician, I'm a producer and a musician. I started off writing poetry, and it still is a large part of the lyrical content of my music. So I totally get that conversation can be interesting for me.
Yeah.
So one of the things we like to do is ask people like, when did you get interested in poetry? At what age do you think you got really into it?
I was in grade school, maybe fourth or fifth grade, and it was English class. And one of our assignments was to write a poem. So at that point, I had no idea that I was a poet, had no idea that I could write poetry. But the reaction that I got from my teacher after we turned in our poems and she read them, it like sparked something in me. And I feel like at that age, that's when you're most influenced and the things that surround you is really impactful. So to see her reaction to something that I wrote, it really sparked something in me. And so I haven't put down the pen since. It's been a part of me and I have her to thank for that.
So, like your website, summersolacehealing.com, for those of
Yeah.
the people who are, um, listening and don't have the video, what will they find if they go to that website? Because I do like to tell people who are on the audio that there's a website that maybe they could check out.
Yeah, absolutely. So, like you said, summersolacehealing.com. I do a range variety of healing modalities. Poetry obviously is one of them, but I do Reiki, meditation, sound healing, hypnosis. I base my life and my purpose and my soul's calling here on life to help myself heal and to help others heal. So, I have a range of modalities that people can see on my website. And I have a lot of clients that come and we just do it all. We work on spoken word poetry because that's healing to some. We might do sound healing the next session. So I like to incorporate all of these modalities for people just to tap into their own healing self.
That's interesting when you talk about healing because a lot of the musicians I've talked to, we initially started this podcast talking to creative people, songwriters, and also filmmakers and actors. And what they always mentioned was like the kind of cathartic nature of being a creative. That like a
Yeah,
songwriter and a poet, when I've talked to them, they tend to say like the act of creating that piece of work, whether it's a lyrics or a song or the music or they are able to kind of process all their feelings, like internal and external, and kind of work through a lot of things. It's like art therapy. And a lot of artists say, well,
absolutely.
I'll do it whether it makes money or not. And it happens to, when you're a musician, you find ways to monetize that. But most of the musicians I've talked to are like, it doesn't really matter if, I'm going to write whether it's going to make money or not. I
Yeah,
write because it's part of my process for
yeah,
my own self
absolutely.
healing.
Absolutely. It very much so is healing. The act of reading poetry is healing, but the act of writing it is healing as well. I think when you read poetry or you listen to music, you get lost in that world of lyrics and tunes and music. And when you're reading the poetry, you are in another world. You're in the world of poetic lyrics. And I feel like that gives the readers and the writers something to like tap into at a creative level, it's bigger picture than what's going on around you.
Yeah, I remember, I was very much attracted to Victorian poets
Yeah.
and the Harlem Renaissance poets. So it's kind of like Dunbar, and then also listening, reading like, William Blake is my favorite from the
Okay.
Victorian era because I like the songs of innocence and experience. I just like the structure because it tends to lend itself to kind of modern songwriting because they're very short and concise.
Yeah,
And
right.
and they kinda get to the point compared to, like, Tennyson and Wordsworth, they're kind of verbose.
Absolutely.
But then their ideas from Tennyson and Lord Byron, they kinda sneak into, like, romantic new wave music. There's a lot of concepts that come from people like that. But,
Yeah.
the interesting thing about it was just the flow of these poets was, like, that they felt like they're talking, I think they talk about the muse and
Oh,
the
yeah.
fact that you could connect to this kinda universal creative like stream that's just out there in the universe. And I
Yeah.
think that when you're an artist, you kind of tap into that and you can kind of channel it. And if you could read, I mean, even if you didn't write the poem, when you do a reading, you can kind
Mhm.
of feel the power that muse had on that poet. And then even how
Absolutely.
you speak it comes to like your human voice is unique and it becomes like your own thing. Like it's like an actor, when you take a script and you make it your own. So
Yeah,
it's still very powerful.
it very much so is, and I think too I read this quote one time and it's like, be the reason that you're someone's muse, not their pain. And I kind of thought, well, I mean, they're the same
Mhm,
because I have used my pain as part of my muse. You
mhm.
know, heartbreak has been a part of my muse. And I think that your muse can change at any time. And that's the beautiful part about it is you can tap into whatever emotion you're feeling, whatever you're surrounded by. Your muse is so universal.
Yeah, a lot of people think of, like, songwriters tend to be like the bad relationship, the melancholy,
Yeah.
your country music is all full of like, "Oh, my heart I've been done wrong," that type of thing, right? Even the blues tends to be about all the things that happened that were wrong, that were bad.
Yeah.
Um, but then if you think about something like funk, it's about like in disco, it's like happy. It's happy, it's
Yeah.
kinda energetic. And, even in that happy energetic, you could actually kind of have a duality and have lyrics that are kind of more thoughtful, but people are into the beat so much they don't really realize that the song is got a duality, which I always
Right.
find super interesting when you have something that seems upbeat, but when you actually read the lyrics, it's not. There's a duality to it where it has this upbeat rhythm, but more, kind of self-conscious or directed. It's just more interesting when people kind of put those layers. It's like a novelist that puts a
Yeah.
layer into something. You're like, oh, it's not as obvious as it seems.
Absolutely, and I love digging deep into, a creator's work because I think some people view it as very surface level, but I'm like, "Oh, no, but if only you could go deeper." Like, read the lyrics without the music, and
Yeah.
then tell me what you think.
But there's so much misinterpretation with music. Like a lot of artists will say, there's famous songs that were
Yeah.
misinterpreted, you know.
Yeah.
'Cause, like if you think about it, just not to push anybody's song, but like Bruce Springsteen's like Born in the USA.
Yeah.
Somebody can think that's a patriotic chant, but when you read about it, it's about somebody coming back from the Vietnam War and things aren't going right. But because it
Yeah.
says born in the USA, people just took the surface main line
Yeah.
and
The
thought it meant
surface.
something that it didn't really mean. They actually, if you
Exactly.
read the whole story, it's about somebody's coming back and they're discouraged because they're not having their life's not going the way they expected. They're not like a World War II veteran coming back, the
Yeah.
Vietnam veteran coming back, and they're not experiencing the same thing that the World War II vets experienced. It's a totally different experience. And so
Yeah.
that's sometimes people don't get to that depth because a lot of poets on purpose mask things or
Yeah.
make things not as obvious that you have to kind of read it a couple of times to kind of get to what they were really pointing out. Do you
Yeah.
enjoy that kind of construction when you do your own work?
Not so much actually. I like to read it, but I don't really like to write that structure. My poetry, if you read my poetry, you will end up at the very end of the poem knowing exactly what I was feeling, thinking, and experiencing. However, I really do love to dissect and investigate and really tap into the emotion of a poem that is structured that way. I think that's just the way my brain works. But when
Hmm.
it comes to writing poetry, I am just very straightforward. This is what I experienced. I
Hmm.
think for me, I want my readers to know exactly what I was thinking and experiencing and feeling. So that way, if they are experiencing, thinking, and feeling the same thing, that they know they're not alone. It's more so I can connect to people, not so that they can dissect my poetry and wonder what is she writing about?
Yeah, yeah. It's like you're trying to read Shakespeare. Yeah, it's very layered, and it's very
Yeah.
like do you really need to be that, or do you need to be more like Faulkner or something? Like you read it and it's more apparent. Like
Yeah.
so yeah, I totally get the kind of like a folk singer, like an Americana trying to tell a story. Right,
Yeah.
and it's a pretty much a universal story. So,
Yeah.
like, on its face now there could be some places where the audience, they feel it, and it's like once, like, the audience gets something, they can, like, interpret it the way they feel it. So,
Yeah.
it could be a universal feeling, but it becomes like each reader kinda takes their own experience and paints it on to it. So, it's
Yeah.
universal, it becomes individual, though. It's interesting.
Absolutely. And I think that goes to so my book, I purposely did not title any of my poems because I felt like if I were to put a title on one of my poems, it would limit it.
Mm,
Because you might read a poem and your friend and your cousin and another family member might read the exact same poem, and each of you would come up with a different title. And I think that's beautiful because one, it creates opportunity for conversation. Like, what did you think about this poem and what would you have titled it? I really wanted to strike movement into people. And I also did not want to limit my poem because what I titled it might be different than every other reader out there. And I really wanted the experience to be for them.
that's interesting because there's a frame of mind, like, in some experimental music where some artist will kinda just, like, give their piece a number, and
Yeah.
it doesn't really
Yeah.
tell you what it means, right? It's a like, I do a lot of things called sound paintings, and they're, like,
Mhm.
just instrumental, kinda atmospheric, kinda rock, operatic type of things, but there's, like sometimes they don't have any lyrics. They're just
Yeah.
movements.
Yeah.
And how people interpret those, like, if I give it a name, then you're gonna say, "Oh, it's like, oh, well, sometimes like with the like, some kind of oceanic cosmic thing." It's like, "Whoa, what's that mean?" So sometimes I'll create names that are so kinda confusing that you're like, "Well, you don't even know what that means anyway." So you kinda take it like a psychedelic approach, or you take a throw it at the wall approach,
Yeah, I
uh,
love
and
that.
then it becomes like, well, then it becomes what anybody can interpret. We kind of listen to, like, some of the people who inspired me, like the original Pink Floyd and Yes. And these are bands that sometimes had songs that were like 18 minutes, 20 minutes long.
Yeah.
And you're like, what are these things? And sometimes they had very weird names. And you're like, what does that mean? And
Right.
the point was like they didn't really want you to fully understand it. They wanted you to kind of own it as
Yeah.
a listener. So I get what you're doing there. That's interesting.
Yeah, I love it because, I could title a poem Happy. So before the reader starts to read the poem, they already have a preconceived notion about what the poem could be about. May or may not be about happiness or being happy, but they already have that split decision in their head. Oh, I wonder if it's going to be a happy poem or if
Yeah.
she's going to talk about happiness. I really just want you to dive into the poems that are in my book and just create your own experience. I really love that. Yeah.
So when you write, like, everybody writes something. I talk to a lot of creative people, and some people kind of have this stream of consciousness thing, or a very well planned out thing, or each project kind of serves the song. So there's
Yeah.
some songs to me that comes in a dream, and then suddenly I wake up and go in my studio and they just put it down because
Okay.
it just all came as one thing. Other songs are kind of go on the grid, go on the bars and write them out, and
Yeah.
be very intentional, but then it's like, it's kinda like, well, which way do you like? It's like, well, some songs come at me where they just they're just there, and other ones I had to work at. And so,
Yeah.
like, how does it kind of work like that for you? That some things you purposely try to create, or do you like to kind of go with a flow?
Yeah, so I have a mixture of both as well. Sometimes I will wake up from a dream and I'm like, okay, I need to write about that. I do a lot of meditation. So sometimes I will purposely meditate to think of my next poem. Like just when I quiet my mind and the thoughts and I become present in this moment, I have a download of thoughts that come to me that are poetry related or topics or stories that I could tell. And so sometimes they are very plotful where I sit down and I'm like, this is what I want to write about. Sometimes it comes to me in the form of a dream. And I'm like, that's an interesting topic. I've never thought about that before. So I think that is the creative power of poets and musicians and artists is that you never know when your next idea is going to hit you. Or if you do have an idea, you never know when the next best lyric is going to come from.
Yeah. Well, a lot of times what I've done over time is I've decided to kind of do like a poetry slam approach, what I call like a stream of consciousness. Well, I'll just sometimes go live on a Facebook event from my studio with all my sense and just do a live jam and
Oh,
don't
I
really
love
think about what I was going to do. I just play for an hour and that's it. And I
yeah,
take it and then I go back. And a lot of times, I've had records where some of those ideas I actually put out as singles within that hour that they actually worked. They were
that's
just kind of
amazing.
one-time takes and they worked and I took them. Other ones were things I went back and I worked on. But
Yeah,
it's just something I got from, in the past, like guys like Frank Zappa and Neil Young were kind of known for just recording a lot of the stuff they did. They would just go and put
yeah,
their recorders on and then go back and say, "Hey, yeah, that's good the way it is. That we could actually put out and other things we're gonna work on." And it's kind of this idea of not being fearful of random events or
yeah.
random thoughts. And it's like, trying to make sure that as you get to be an artist, you start to trust yourself. It's like, hey, I probably should put the recorder on because I don't know what I'm gonna do. And
Yeah,
and maybe it's gonna be better than what I was planning.
absolutely. I do that in the car. I'll put the recorder on and I will just start talking. It doesn't have to be about anything. It doesn't have to be about something that happened that day. I will just start talking.
Mhm.
And then I just call them car thoughts, like, they're my car thoughts,
Yeah.
and so I will go back and listen to it, I'm like, "Ooh, that's good. I need to tap into that. What's going on there?"
Yeah, it's just like, 'cause times I think with some people, like, they're afraid to be creative. They're so scared of hitting a wrong note, right? They're
Yeah.
so scared of saying the wrong thing, so then say, "Well, I can't be a musician because they said I was no good when I was trying, or I'm not Jimmy Page," or they compare themselves to somebody that yeah, it was like, who's gonna be Beethoven? Who's gonna be Bach? Like, that doesn't
Yeah,
mean that you shouldn't be a musician because 'cause you're not at that
right.
level. But
Yeah.
some people will look at it and say, "Well, I can't play like Jimmy Page, so I shouldn't even touch a guitar." Or I can't sing like Marvin Gaye, so I should never be a singer. It's like, but that's not necessarily like your own voice is so unique as a human being that if you attempt just do something that's like naturally you, you'd be surprised how many things are actually how many people are like don't appreciate their own capabilities and they've kind of
Mhm.
created that ceiling. Uh,
Yes.
How did you get like it seems like you were always kind of into poetry from a very young age and you didn't feel that you should restrict yourself, right? Did you feel like you wanted to do it and you didn't feel any kind of ceiling on doing it?
Yeah, so I think as when I was little, I didn't have any restriction because I didn't know any better. But as you get older and you do start to see comparison and there's a lot of great poets out there. So as I grew older and read more poetry, I'm like, wow, my poetry is not as good as all of these other poems I'm reading. If I would have let that stop me, I probably if I would have let that stop me, I probably wouldn't be where I'm at today. And I have to
Mhm.
remember, we all have to remember that we each have a unique voice, like you were saying. I am unique to me, and you are unique to you. We all have something to bring to the table that another person can't. And not saying that that is bad or that we're not capable, but we are all unique. If we were all the same, if we all sang like our favorite artist and painted like our favorite painter, the world would be really boring.
Yeah.
So be be different, be unique. You might have some poetry within you that you put out into the world, and someone else is going to read your poems and be like, "Wow, those are really good. I'm not as good as this person." You have to give yourself a chance. So, I did run into that as I grew older, reading lots of poetry and wanting to be like them and wanting to write like them. It's completely natural. But what I will say is use that as your power, because
Yeah.
you can grow your talent and you can grow your skills. If you want to be like those poets that you read and those musicians that you listen to, it's very achievable. And what's going to happen is it's going to be unique to your story and your voice and your energy.
But I kind of equate it to like you think about it like somebody, an athlete, and they do like 10,000 hours of training and they get like perfect at doing the 3-point shot. Or they get perfect at doing their plays as a quarterback or whatever.
Yeah.
Same thing happens with your art, right? If you start to trust yourself and you don't say, well, like I don't want to be Jimmy Page, I want to be me, and
Yeah.
so I'm going to go and just perfect my own craft. After you do that 10,000 hours, over time, I've been playing since I was 17. I got to a certain point where like there's a unique sound to what I do that's like uniquely me. And I kind of
Yeah.
trust it. After all these years, I trust what I can do and I don't worry about it. And that's
Yeah.
where people kind of stop themselves because, I knew a bunch of guys when I was 17 and we were playing in bars and whatever in the basements. And because they had these expectations that they wanted to be like this other person, and then they're never going to be that person. So you're never going to be. So they gave up,
Yeah.
and I didn't give up. And the difference is like when you keep on perfecting your craft, then it becomes something that I found all kinds of open doors by just being there, by just showing up. then then you start to trust yourself and then people know who you are and things start to happen. But if you don't have that belief in yourself initially, then you never get those opportunities because you're too scared to even open the door.
Yeah. And what I always say too, out of all of the people that are out there in the world, like there are people that are waiting for someone like you to create something. You are exactly their energetic match. You are what people are looking for. So please show up out in the world and put your work out there, because I may not like a certain poem, or maybe I didn't resonate with a certain poem. That doesn't mean it's not good, but there's going to be someone else out there in the world that
Mhm.
reads it and they're going to fall in love with that poem because they resonate, because it's you, because you are unique and they love your story and they want to follow you. So I always tell people when those doubts and those thoughts come in, know that you are what people are looking for. And that's always helped me too. I'm unique enough. We all are unique enough. And we are all going to find our own unique people that match us, that understand us, and want more of us.
Well, now the way the world is, like when I started, like I actually used to go to these like this Fire and Water cafe in Northampton, Massachusetts, and read spoken
Hmm.
word before I ever did any of my Phantom Electric Ghost music. And now that
Yeah.
the world's got this like internet world, you know, how does like in this kind of age, do you still go to like the coffee shop type of poetry place to do like poetry slams and poetry presentations and like these poetry, theaters, or do you use like kind of the wild the web to do it on social media? So it's a combination of all of it.
It's a combination. I think that if the resources are there, let's tap into all of them. I think that social media is a good way to connect with people that you wouldn't see in your local coffee shop. But I think that there is power in connecting with people that are local and surrounding you. So I like to tap into all of them. I'll travel. all over my state. I'll find local poetry nights or book fairs or book clubs, and then I'll go live on Facebook and connect with somebody that's in a different country or a different
Mhm.
state that's miles away. And I think that that is important to be able to use all of the resources to get your word out there, and showing up online is a pretty scary thing because you are tapping into thousands and hundreds of people. But if you can show up and be vulnerable and show your face and connect with people, like you are already doing the brave thing and stepping out there and showing yourself to the world. So I've been doing a little bit of everything to get my word out there.
So do you find that the podcast form has given you more opportunity to get the word out about your poetry and the things you're doing with like holistic healing? It seems like to me, like I've been in podcasting since 2016, and it's been like an explosion in the last 2 years where the
Yeah.
podcasting world has just opened up, and it's kind of like the opposite of a lot of other social media that's very short form. There's
Mhm.
a lot of social media like the reels and the TikToks, they're like 30 seconds, 90 seconds, 15 seconds. But the
Yeah.
podcast kinda can be 30 minutes, hour. Some of them go even longer. And
Yeah.
people actually have these kind of radio, like, interviews or being able to do presentations or even have artists actually read or play in a
Yeah.
form where people tend to say, "Well, you only got, like, 5 minutes, you only got, like, 30 seconds, you don't have a lot of time," that we are allowing more time in the podcast format. So does that help as a poet?
Absolutely. And so if you think about like maybe your favorite song or your favorite movie and it's reaching the end and you're like, "Oh, I want more." I feel like that's what the podcast world does. If someone's listening to me right now and they really are resonating with the words that I'm saying, they're going to want more. They're not going to want to just listen to me on a 30-second reel. They want to get lost into the things that I'm saying and presenting, or maybe it's just resonating with them unlike anything they've ever heard before. And so the podcast world allows people and listeners to really get to know somebody because it's kind of hard to get to know someone with a 30-second reel.
Yeah.
And if I run across somebody that I'm like, "Ooh, I know that person from 30 seconds," hopefully I win the lottery or something because I feel like that's super rare. But yeah, the
Yeah.
podcast world, it's more intimate where I think social media and reels and posting those quick little minute videos is just something to grab attention. But podcast, speaking about your story, it's more intimate, it's more personal, and it gives the audience an opportunity to get to know you as a person.
Yeah, that's what I found is like, and it's interesting because there is a kind of thing going on where like a podcast will fail after like 10 or 12 episodes. But
Yeah,
then usually it's because people had certain expectations. And what I kind of looked at is like, I'm just going to keep on showing up. And
yeah,
that's like my whole podcast. The reason I've been out here is because I just decided to kind of evolve it. It kind of
absolutely.
started with just musicians, then started talking to writers and authors
Yeah,
and poets, then film directors, then shamans, then life coaches, then therapists. And I said, well, you know what? I'm going to be expansive,
yeah.
which was similar to what I did with my music. My music is multiple genre. It's jazz,
Mhm.
it's rock, it's punk, it's country, it's whatever. And because I decided, like, well, why not be expansive in my content? Then I can reach as many people as I feel like who is interesting to talk to. So
Yeah.
that I didn't want to. And people told me, "Oh, you shouldn't do that. You should be very narrow." And I said, "Well, some of those people told me to be narrow. They're not around anymore." So the thing is like it's like you kind of go with your gut, and like some people have a narrow focus, fine, that works for them. But for me, it was like the idea that I could just be expansive, and then it leads me to kind of go wherever I feel like going. Uh,
Yeah,
and I thought, it works for me, just
I
like the
love
live format versus like a rehearsed, edited format. I was like, I don't want anything to do with the edited, controlled podcast because I just didn't feel it was real.
absolutely. I like that too because I think it goes back to why I don't title my poems. It's because it limits them. But you don't want to stay in a narrow lane because it limits you. And we are infinite beings with infinite possibilities, infinite opportunities. Why not expand and grow and reach multiple people, different kinds of people? I mean, I think that the world is so big. Why would we limit ourselves? And I'm not saying that it's not okay to have a niche or like a controlled focus, but I always just like to tell people, like, step outside of your comfort zone. Try something new that maybe you wouldn't have thought about before, because it's going to open more doors to more infinite possibilities, more
I think
infinite
that's the nature.
opportunities. Yeah, go
Well, the
ahead.
nature of creativity is like you. The nature of creativity is like you could get to be a master of a certain area, and then it's because you got that 10,000 hours and you just stay in that, right? So you could end up
Yeah,
being like, I'm just gonna read somebody else's poetry. I'm just gonna be a cover band. I'm gonna be an actor, and I'm not gonna write my own scripts. I'm just gonna read other people's stuff. But then there's a point where it's like, hey, I want to kind of think out the box. I want to produce my own work, right?
yeah,
And maybe that work, sometimes it's jazz, sometimes it's rock, sometimes it's funk, sometimes it's punk, whatever. It's whatever I feel like doing. And
yeah,
like I didn't want to have to rebrand every time. So I said, well,
right.
this is going to be Phantom Electric, and that's what it is. And so it's
I
like,
love that.
and then other people are like, well, now I got to rebrand my podcast if I change the topic. Like, why? You don't need to rebrand it. Like this, just
Yeah.
go with it.
Just go with it, you know? I think that is a beautiful part of life, is like we can try to control as much as possible, but sometimes it just doesn't go the way that you thought you wanted it to, or the way you thought it should go. But that's the beautiful thing, is like you always uncover more to life. You know, you see the bigger picture. Life becomes more meaningful. Your work becomes more meaningful, because if we all stayed the same and talked about the same things, like I said, it goes back to, we would live in a boring world. And I bet because you do so many different topics and tap into so many different things now, genres, poets, musicians, you always have fun. You always have
Yeah.
something to look forward to. It's like a fun time, and that is so beautiful.
Well, I think people give up when they don't have fun. So the
Yeah,
problem I told people is like if you put yourself in a box, eventually you're gonna get so constrained by that box, it is gonna not be fun. Then you're
yes.
gonna stop, right? So if you just say like, oh, I'm just gonna be a cover band, I'm just gonna play the same thing over and over, and it's eventually you get bored,
Yeah,
right? So you get bored, then what happens? You stop doing it. You let the guitar sit in the corner, or you don't touch the
right.
keyboard. You don't hit the mic because you got you kind of self-fulfilling prophecy because you put too many constraints. So the
Yeah,
idea is like I think some people do that because they're fearful. Yeah, it all comes
yeah,
back down to this like the kind of healing journey for your art, right? They kind of
yeah,
like what is art there? But if you don't address the problem that maybe is there right underneath, is like why are you trying to do what you're doing? If you don't
yeah,
understand why you're doing something, then you might not really get to the root of like why are you blocking yourself, right? Because you didn't ever have
yeah,
that conversation. So maybe this gets into the idea like the healing journey usually starts when people start to realize they're hitting the wall
yeah,
and they need somebody to help them, right? So they need
absolutely.
somebody to show them a different way because they keep on doing the same thing. And what happens? They keep on doing the same thing.
Yeah, you don't go anywhere. You just end up going in a circle. I think, poetry for me is therapy. So I will always be a poet. But, sometimes I do want to tap into like a romance novelist, or, I think I would be a great singer-songwriter. And I think if I were to tap into those, they would help me become a better poet. So even if you do have a specific niche, don't be afraid to tap into something else, because it could help you get that power to become a better whatever you already are. I might learn something by being a romantic novelist that I can use in my poetry. So I just want people to not be afraid to tap into the things that maybe they didn't think about before, or maybe they're afraid to do. Usually, the things that we're most afraid to do are the things that we should do.
Yep.
And I have learned that over and over again. There's a difference between being like fearful and being just like scared of it. Like, if you think it's going to cause you danger in any way, please don't do it. But if you're kind of like on the borderline, I don't know if I'm excited or scared or nervous, do it. Do that thing.
What I also find is like the vulnerability. Like if you're a singer songwriter, if you go back to like the late 60s and early 70s, the core aspect of the singer songwriter is like the Joni Mitchells,
Yeah.
the Bob Dylans, the people like that they were writing was the vulnerability that they brought to the airwaves, where they were willing to kind of dive in deep into their own issues and then make things that were universal. So they
Yeah.
were able to like it was these stories that were like what really deep. Like the thing I like about singer songwriters, like reading a novel. Usually the
Mhm.
depths of a singer songwriter's original work has so much like vulnerability and so much like real, like it feels like authentic. It doesn't feel like
Yes.
it was some Madison Avenue creation to be a hit. It
Yeah.
feels like, you listen to A Case of You. It's like by Joni Mitchell. It's like that's a very authentic, real feeling that she had. And it comes out, it's
Yeah.
like, wow. And when you hear that kind of magic, James Taylor, I seen fire, I seen rain. It's like that, now that's coming from pain. If you read what
Yeah.
story that came, that it came from,
Yeah.
and being able to be that vulnerable and present that, that's hard to do. You have to get to a certain space in your life where you can do that.
Absolutely. I think there is power in vulnerability because it is the hardest thing to do, but when you do it, you are stepping into your fullest potential. And I love the word authentic. That probably has to be my most favorite word in the dictionary. It's because it's real. And so you were talking about those musicians and their lyrics, and it all goes down to energy. So if you're listening to a song and you are so completely moved by it, it might even create some emotions for you. That was authentic. That was real. That was that artist or creator pouring their real, true, authentic feelings into their work. And I think there's nothing more beautiful than being authentic in this world. And we all know how to be authentic, but we do get trapped in that fear that we won't be accepted, that we won't be liked, that it's going to create more problems. But think about your favorite song. Think about that part where they were vulnerable and they shared their story to you. I think about many songs that I listened to growing up, and I would start crying because that was real. That was something that the artist put out into the world that they wanted to share with people. And I think being real and authentic and vulnerable is the bravest thing anybody can do in the world. And don't let that fear stop you from doing the most bravest thing that you can do in the world.
Yeah, it's just a really magical feeling when you hear or read, a piece of work that is like really dived into the depths. And it's kind of like this idea that you're getting away from like the shallow nature of things. Because a lot of people, it's like you try to be surface, you have a mask on, you could get a
Yeah.
little theatrical, you kind of create this other you, right?
Yeah.
And some people in their art, there's some musicians, what they do is they create this other you, the other
Yeah.
version of themselves. It's a very theatrical, over exaggerated version, and there's some truths in it.
Yeah.
There's some vulnerability in it, but they've created this kind of character, and I kinda think about, like, the Mick Jaggers and the David Bowies. They would present this very, like, kinda really very, very, extreme kind of version of themselves, and
Mhm.
there's some truths in some of the songs. They do have vulnerabilities in them, and
Yeah.
are kind of personal, but they've created these characters to kinda separate themselves. In order for
Right.
themselves to function, they created this kinda other theatrical stage version of themselves.
Yeah.
Um, a lot of artists kinda do that, when even if sometimes you're a poet, you might have a stage voice for your
Right.
poetry if you go out. That might not be what you do when you're kinda talking to yourself.
Yeah,
It's just kind of
absolutely.
the nature of how you
Yeah.
kind of protect yourself.
Yeah, and I think that that is the safest thing that you can do, and there is vulnerability in protecting yourself because you honor and respect and love yourself so much that you do wanna protect that part of you that is a little fearful to be vulnerable, and that's okay. You know, it's vulnerability is something that we're not really taught. We just kinda grow up and we kinda learn it here and there, or we see someone being vulnerable and it gives us the strength to do the same. But, you know, it is a learning process to be vulnerable, and it might not look the same for everybody. So if there is a way that you can be vulnerable and protect yourself at the same time, like I will never knock that, you know. Do what feels right for you. Protect
Yeah.
yourself at all cost and just have fun with the process, you know? Be easy on yourself because if you get stuck in these downward spiraling of I'm not going to be liked or I'm not safe or this isn't right or I'm too scared, then you'll never show up in the world. Just do what feels right. Like you said, listen to your body. Trust what's coming up for you. Our bodies are always talking to us. They're always delivering messages. We just have to listen to ourselves and trust our voice, our own voice. And I think that's where the power in my poetry comes from is that I trust myself. I listen
Mhm.
to myself and I listen to the messages that are coming through for me.
'Cause the thing is, like, if part of being like an artist or a creative is you actually are you're taking what's inside and bringing it out. So
Yeah.
once you vocalize something, once you make it real, then that kind of that that's where I think the therapeutic nature of being an artist is. Where a lot of people bottle up those things, then they kind of have these explosions or these boiling points, because they
Yeah.
never address it. They never speak it out because maybe they were taught, oh, you don't show that you're hurt. You don't show how you
Yeah.
feel because that's not the way you should be. And if you're taught
Right.
that, and you're taught something like, well, that's a truth, but it's really a belief, and it's
Yeah.
not really true, and then it's actually preventing you from being you. But if you believe it's
Absolutely.
true, you can't fix that until you don't.
Yeah,
So it's
absolutely.
like, so the whole thing is like learning to speak out. For some people, it's very hard because they were trained their whole life not to speak out,
Yeah,
not to
you
bring
have
it
to
out.
do Yeah. You have to do a lot of, reconditioning sometimes because the way that you were taught and the way that you were raised isn't what's best for you anymore, and that's okay. I think we have to let go of the idea that, well, this is just how I am or this is just how I was raised. We can change and grow as people. You know, the way I was raised may not be the way I want to live the rest of my life, and that's okay. It served its purpose growing up. I'm safe and I'm protected and I'm okay. But now I want to show up in the world in a different way. And I think too, for me at least, there was some fear behind sharing my poetry out into the world. There always will be whenever you're vulnerable because it's scary. But for me, there was always a relief that outweighed that fear, knowing that someone might read my poem and be like, oh my gosh, finally somebody gets me. That relief, knowing that outweighed any fear that I had putting my poetry out there in the world. So I hope that that helps someone else who's maybe fearful of putting their work out there. Know that someone might view your work or see your poetry or listen to your music and be like, this is what I've been waiting for. This is what I've been looking for. And keep that in your mind when you're creating, because I promise it will work wonders for you.
It's interesting because one of the things that happened with me is like I was a musician. I never sang for many years until like I reconfigured my project and created the idea of this Phantom Electric Ghost. And part of the
Yeah.
idea was that it was this kind of fictional idea of a band of ghosts or phantoms.
Okay.
Initially, when I started, I didn't have confidence in my male voice, so I used synthesizer technology to create a female version of my voice, and I created a
Oh,
character. and she became the lead singer of the band and was using technology to shift my voice and pitch it. So I
Wow.
created this character named Josephine Electric, and my music went from like 2,000 listens to like 70,000 listens
Wow.
because the music did before didn't have any vocals. And then
Yeah.
suddenly my music had this female vocalist and people thought it was a real person. But it was a person with me, it was just pitching my voice, it was a character. And then it
Right.
took me many years to actually decide to actually use my male voice. I just started using it maybe in the last 2 years, uh,
Mhm.
to bring that male character into the band. And then people are like, "Wow," it's like, "What are all these voices?" And I'm like, it was kinda like I had a kinda hang up where I wasn't comfortable with my voice for many years. I just let my playing play for me. I would just play my
Yeah.
keyboards, and that's what I did. Nobody heard what I had to say. But then I had this, like, kind of epiphany. I said, "You know what? I gotta stop being scared of that and just do something."
Right.
And it kinda got me out there, launched me in the area, and it wasn't something I expected. It was like an accident when I found that female voice. I was just
Yeah.
playing with my mic, playing with some equipment, and I liked what it sounded like. So what happens if I try to use that? And then I used it and it worked. And
That
and
is
it
so
worked with a bunch of lyrics I wrote that were kinda coming from a female-centric point of view. And then I said, "Well, I'll
yeah,
create this character and kinda be able to speak it." And it was just really strange, the way that happened. But,
yeah.
you never know how things are gonna happen when you're a creative person.
You really don't. I love that. I love that so much for you, and I hope that what people heard you just say gives them power to step outside of their norm as well, because now look at you. And I think that you're a walking testament of what happens when you do the things that you're afraid to do, because they might open up doors to things that you might have never even imagined. So, yeah, that was beautiful.
Yeah, just it kinda shows you the vulnerability of putting yourself out there, and another story was, like, the first time I ever played I played a show in New York City.
Yeah.
And, part of my band was, like, I used to have this mask because I was using this female voice, so I looked like a phantom. So you couldn't
Okay.
tell if I were male or female. And so the whole point was because I could shift the voices, because I had this kind of phantom, like, LED mask, and it had this,
Wow.
like, LED cape. And so when I went on stage, you couldn't tell if I was a guy or a girl. It was just I'm a ghost, and a ghost can be male or female. And so when I
Yeah.
sang the songs with the female voice, I wasn't trying to present myself as a female. I'm just a female ghost or a male ghost,
Yeah.
based on the pitch of the voice. And then it worked. And I got, people wanted to see it. And I was like, wow. And I wasn't sure when I first went on that stage, I didn't know how people were going to take it. But I said, you know
Yeah.
what? I went from 2,000 listens to 70,000. So it probably is gonna work. But
Yeah.
that the jump on that stage was hard because I didn't know how people were gonna take it.
Yeah, and that's the thing, you don't know how people are gonna take it, and it might be a flop, but at least you know that, "Okay, maybe that wasn't it." And for every "no" that I've ever gotten, every, fail or flop, it's never a, "Oh, okay, that was terrible, you should never show out again." It just means, "Not this, something else." So, don't be afraid to do those things, and they might not always be a success, but it will lead you to that next step closer that is, or, I think a lot of times we get stuck in the, well, what if this doesn't work out? Or what if people don't like this? But I always challenge people, what if it does? What if this ends up being the best thing that I've ever wrote? What if this is something that goes viral in the world? Like, just change your perspective on your thoughts. I think it's so easy for us to say, well, what if it doesn't work out? And I always say, well, what if it does? What are
Yeah.
you going to do when it works out?
Well, the problem is with a lot of things is, like, people don't see all the processes that creative people go through, or they don't see the cutting room floor. Like, for, like, musicians, we can have hundreds of reels of songs.
Yeah.
Maybe 2 or 3 of them are, like, work for the public.
Yeah.
But, like, out of those hundreds of songs sitting around, are those failures or were those just how you got to where you are, right? And it's the
Yeah,
same thing for
absolutely.
writers and other and poets. Like you have your poets that are kind of your signature poem, And then all
Yeah.
the poems that led up to your signature poem. Are those failures or do they lead you to that? The
Yeah,
way the
they
way you
do.
look at it is it's like those things led you to where you are, so it's not a failure. Each is like a step in the road and
Yeah,
on the rung
exactly.
to get where you wanna be.
Exactly. I think that they all lead us to where we're supposed to be, and we just have to be thankful for the process. The process and the journey is just as important as the destination, wherever we're going. Be thankful for the process, be thankful for that journey. I always like to think of my poetry as like a refurbishing project. You could take something that's broken and damaged and been through the ringer. And I used to think that I was broken and going through it and just rough around the edges. But I've taken my poetry and I created something beautiful from what I went through. I took the broken and damaged parts of me and I put my story out there and I created beautiful poetry from that. If you think about a dresser that doesn't have any handles anymore, maybe the paint is chipping, and you refurbish that and you get it brand new,
Mhm.
there's beauty in that process. There's beauty in taking the things that happen to you and refurbishing them to create something more meaningful in life.
Yeah, it's all the pieces together. They might be jagged or they once you construct it and you smooth it out, that's what happens with, with art, you first start painting, people don't see the big picture. It's like they
Yeah.
don't see what your vision is until it starts to come together. Same thing happens with music and poetries. Like the first couple of lines, you might not understand it, right? And
Yeah,
then it starts to build together and starts to connect, and then you're like, oh, okay, the puzzle's coming together. And that's how
yeah,
life is. But a lot of times today, we're in such a flash kind of instant gratification that if I do a post, right, it's got to get a million views or it's not successful, or I got to get
yeah,
this metric or I'm not successful, or got to get to this chart or I'm not successful. And it kind of doesn't take into account. There's a lot of art. Like even one of my favorite poets, William Blake, he was not known in his time.
yeah,
He was not known. He was found. He wasn't one of the Victorian poets that was known during his lifetime. He was known like in our lifetime. He became
yeah,
one of the signature poets after the fact. So that doesn't mean the art he did had no value. It is sometimes it's timing.
exactly. Yeah. Yeah, because if he would have based his success on, well, I'm not famous or I'm not well known or nobody's buying my work, he would have thought that, well, I'm not anybody, I guess. My work is not important. But if he were to see the way that people are about it now, it would just like open his eyes completely. And I think that's an important message for everybody. Just because your poem isn't getting thousands of likes and your book is not selling millions of copies doesn't mean you do not have a beautiful work of art in your hands. It's beautiful because you created it. It's beautiful because you embraced vulnerability. You know, and someone is going to find it. And even if it is just one person, know that you had the power to touch somebody else. And that is worth celebrating. That is still very beautiful. And you got to do the creative process, which is what I've been saying all along. Trust the process, have fun with the process, because the process is just as important and it's just as beautiful as the destination.
Well, it's just the whole thing of like the energy healing and the kind of holistic nature of art and your body and your soul and your mind. Some people kind of miss the legs of that thing, like they don't feel satisfied because they're not connecting to those pieces in themselves because everybody's creative, but some people have been told that only certain people can be artists, like it's some kind of
Yeah.
special group. When everybody is a creative person, it's just like
Yeah.
like everybody would always think you got to go to Berkeley, think you have to go to RISD, you have to go to some special school to be like an artist. They know you don't, you know,
No.
and so because they put these preconditions on it, then they say, "Well, I can't be in that group of people because I'm not
Right.
going to get in." It's like, well, that's
Yeah.
not necessarily true because look at me. If you look at like in the blues, nobody went to Berkeley. In jazz, most of the jazz musicians weren't trained in the school in the
Yeah.
conservatory. Like it's very common. that some of the greatest musicians ever that had no training, can't even read, can't even sight read, but they got the
Yeah,
feeling. And because they trusted themselves, they put it out there. So that
ab
tells you right there that you don't have to have those qualifications to get where you want to go. You just got to believe that you have something to say or something to put
yeah. Yeah, that's so true. Everybody is a creative in their own way. Everybody is a storyteller in their own way. If you have a story to tell, a picture to paint, put it out there. You don't have to go to school for it. You don't have to have a degree or a certification. Just show up and be yourself, be authentic, create whatever that looks like for you because the world needs it. The world needs you. The world needs creativity. So it might be different and it might be strange, but someone's going to view that and it's going to be exactly what they were looking for. And I just love that about creativity that you can put anything out there in the world. If it's true to you and your story that you're putting out there in the world, doesn't matter who's looking at it or who wants to buy it. It's true to you. You created something that's special to you. So please just put your work out there. Please trust the messages that are coming up for you. Trust your body, trust your emotions, and know that your story is safe to be told.
Well, I want to tell people again about your website. It's solacehealing.com. We did at the beginning, and we like to do it again because we always encourage people who listen or watch our podcast to actually click on the links that we provide for that our guests provide with us, because then you can do a further uh, connection to what we're talking about. You can actually go deeper. And so again, to tell the people, if they go to summersolacehealing.com, what would they find there again?
Yeah, so that's Summer Solace Healing. I'm actually going to speak that out too for anybody that's listening. It's Summer, Summer, Solace, Solace, Healing, Healing, summersolacehealing.com. You will find my poetry book, Ocean, which was published in December of 2022. And you will find all of the different healing modalities that I use for myself and others, including Reiki, meditation, sound healing, hypnosis, and much more. If you are looking for healing or just want to reach out and see what you can do to take back your power, to become that powerful creator that you are meant to be, reach out to me at any time.
Well, thank you again for being on the program. We love talking to creative people. And we think I know the message we've been saying today. I hope it resonates with anybody who's been kind of on the fence of whether or not they should take that step. And it's like, when say, yeah, take the step.
Take the step.
Because,
Yes, absolutely.
yeah, because I love to see new artists. I mean, my whole podcast is about finding emerging and independent voices. That's what I
Yeah,
like to do. I like to find people that people haven't talked to, or need to talk to. And I feel
yeah.
that people need to hear that. And if you put yourself out there, then maybe you'll get to talk to me So,
Absolutely, I
in the
love
future.
that. Well, thank you for being open and for your gift as well, and just showing up in the world and giving other people the platform to do the same. So you are very appreciated, and I thank you for having me as a guest on here tonight. And the hour flew by quickly, so that was a lot of fun.
Yeah, that's just the nature of it. I feel like, it's like that authenticity and honesty of having a conversation with another human being, and that to me has like, that's what I've tried to bring to the table with this podcast, is to have these really interesting conversations that I have no idea where it's going to go. And that's why I like to do it, because like
Yeah,
just you just kind of feel it and trust it, and just talk to a person, and realize what they're into, and let the world know what they're doing. And that gives a perspective to the world, that people need that kind of light in the world. And I think it's cool to do that. So I thank you again for being on the show and
yeah.
providing your perspective.
Thank you so much.
Have a good night.
Thank you. You too.